My name is Chloe, and I used to believe that being the responsible daughter meant I was loved. It meant security, trust, a place in my parents' future. I was wrong. I didn't find out about my parents' will during some emotional family conversation. There was no warning, no explanation, no honesty. I heard about it by accident. One careless sentence. One quiet moment I was never meant to hear. Everything will go to Ethan. Chloe will be fine. That single line erased years of sacrifice in seconds. For years, I helped pay their mortgage. I covered bills. I fixed problems they couldn't handle. I told myself it was temporary. That family meant mutual support. But in that moment, I finally understood the truth. I wasn't part of their future. I was just their backup plan. And once I realized that, I stopped playing my role. For as long as I can remember, I was the reliable one. That's the word my parents loved using whenever they talked about me to relatives or friends. Reliable Chloe. Responsible Chloe. It sounded like a compliment. I didn't realize until much later that it was actually a role they had quietly assigned me and expected me to never step out of. I moved out of my parents' house when I was 22, right after college. I got a stable job in Columbus, Ohio, rented a small apartment, and started building my own life. Nothing flashy, just steady, predictable, safe. My younger brother, Ethan, stayed home. At first, my parents said it was temporary. He's just figuring things out. Mom told me over the phone. He needs time, Dad added. Time turned into years. Ethan drifted from one half-hearted plan to another. Online courses he never finished. Business ideas that went nowhere. Jobs he quit after a few weeks because they were too stressful. Meanwhile, I was the one they called when things went wrong. Chloe, the water heater stopped working. Chloe, the mortgage is due and things are a little tight this month. Chloe, can you help us just this once? At first, I helped because I wanted to. They were my parents. I loved them. I told myself it wouldn't become a habit. It did. I started covering part of their mortgage, then utilities, then property insurance, sometimes groceries, sometimes repairs. It was never one big request, always small enough to feel reasonable. Just this month. Just until Ethan gets on his feet. Every time I hesitated, Mom had a way of softening her voice. You're so strong, Chloe. You always land on your feet. You don't struggle like your brother does. And every time I caved. Because what kind of daughter lets her parents worry when she can help? Whenever I visited, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Ethan slept in late, scrolling through his phone, completely unbothered. Dad complained about bills. Mom sighed dramatically while accidentally leaving overdue notices on the kitchen counter. Once, I asked Ethan directly, "Have you thought about helping Mom and Dad out a bit?" He laughed like I'd told a joke. "They've got you," he said. "You're good at this stuff." That should have been a warning. Instead, I swallowed the discomfort and kept going. I told myself I was being mature, that I was doing the right thing, that someday, my parents would see how much I had sacrificed. What I didn't realize back then was that my reliability had turned into something else entirely. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their solution. Their safety net. Their emergency fund. Their silent expectation. And the worst part? They never once asked if I was okay with it. I didn't go looking for the truth. That's the part people never believe when I tell this story. They assume I was snooping, digging through drawers, trying to find something to be angry about. I wasn't. I was helping my mom organize paperwork at their house one Saturday afternoon. Dad had asked me to scan a few documents for him, insurance forms, tax statements, things they never quite understood no matter how many times I explained them. "Just put everything in neat piles," Mom said, already overwhelmed. That was when I saw the folder. It was thick, beige, and neatly labeled in bold black letters. Estate planning. My chest tightened. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I told myself it was none of my business. But curiosity has a way of getting louder when you've already given so much of yourself away. I picked it up. Inside were neatly organized documents, stamped, signed, official, legal language, clean margins, no confusion. And then, I saw it. The last will and testament. I didn't read every page. I didn't need to. One line was enough. Everything, the house, the savings, the accounts, was designated to Ethan. I flipped the page, my fingers trembling, searching for my name. It wasn't there. Not in any meaningful way. Just a generic sentence about loving both children equally. No assets. No mention of contributions. No acknowledgement of the years I had helped keep that house afloat. My stomach dropped. I remember sitting there, staring at the paper, feeling something cold spread through my chest. Not just anger, something deeper. A slow, painful understanding. This wasn't an oversight. This was a decision. A choice they had made calmly, carefully, and without a single thought about how it would affect me. I put the folder back exactly where I found it, my hands shaking too much to do anything else. I finished scanning the documents like a robot, my mind replaying the words over and over. Everything goes to Ethan. When Dad walked back into the room, he frowned. "You're quiet," he said. "Everything okay?" I looked up at him, my mouth dry. "Yeah," I replied softly. I just needed a minute, but I knew. From that moment on, I knew exactly where I stood in my family. Not as a daughter they planned a future with, but as someone they assumed would always be there paying, fixing, supporting while someone else received everything in return. And once that truth settled in, there was no unseeing it. I didn't confront them right away. For a few days, I carried the weight of what I had seen in silence. I replayed the words in my head over and over, trying to convince myself there had to be more to the story. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe they planned to explain it later. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how neatly everything fit. Every late-night phone call, every "just this once," every reminder that Ethan was struggling. It all made sense now. A week later, I went back to my parents' house. I told myself I would stay calm, that I just wanted clarity. Dad was in the living room, flipping through paperwork like usual, already irritated before I even spoke. "Can we talk?" I asked. He sighed. "About what?" I took a breath. "The will." His hands froze. For a brief second, I saw something flash across his face, surprise, maybe even guilt. Then it was gone, replaced with irritation. "Where did you hear about that?" he asked. "I saw it," I said evenly. "The estate planning folder." He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. "Chloe, it's not what you think." That sentence. It felt rehearsed. "How is it not?" I asked. "Everything goes to Ethan. The house, the savings, all of it." Dad avoided my eyes. "It's complicated." I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "You keep saying that, but you're not explaining anything." That's when Mom walked in. She took one look at my face and knew. Her shoulders stiffened, her lips pressing together like she was bracing for impact. "Chloe," she said gently, "honey, let's not turn this into a big fight." "I'm not fighting," I replied. "I'm asking why." She glanced at Dad, then back at me. "You don't need the inheritance." The words hit harder than I expected. "I don't need it?" I repeated. "You have a good job," she continued, her tone calm, almost soothing. "You're independent. You've always been strong." I stared at her. "And Ethan?" She hesitated. "Ethan. Struggles." That was it. Years of paying their bills. Years of carrying their stress. Reduced to a single sentence. "So let me get this straight," I said slowly. "I help you keep the house. I cover expenses when things get tight. I show up whenever you call. And because of that, I don't matter?" "That's not what we're saying," Dad snapped. "It's exactly what you're saying," I replied. "You planned a future where I get nothing." Mom's voice sharpened. "Chloe, you're being dramatic." Something inside me cracked. "I wasn't dramatic when I paid your mortgage," I said quietly. "I wasn't dramatic when I covered your bills. I wasn't dramatic when I stepped in every time something went wrong." Silence filled the room. Dad finally spoke. "We assumed you'd understand." That assumption hurt more than the will itself. They didn't ask. They didn't explain. They just decided. I nodded slowly, feeling an unfamiliar calm settle over me. "Okay," I said. "Now I understand too." Mom frowned. "Understand what?" "Where I stand." I stood up, grabbed my bag, and headed for the door. "Chloe, don't walk away like this," Mom called after me. But I already had. Because in that moment, I realized something crucial. They had made their choice a long time ago. And now, it was my turn to make mine. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't send a dramatic message or give them an ultimatum. I simply stopped. I stopped paying the mortgage. Stopped covering the utilities. Stop stepping in every time something went overdue or inconvenient. For the first time in years, I chose silence. At first, nothing happened. No calls, no texts, almost like they hadn't noticed yet. Part of me wondered if this was what they always assumed, that I would keep paying quietly, no matter what, even after learning the truth. That I would swallow the hurt and continue playing my role. 2 weeks passed. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mom. "Mom, the property taxes are due." That was it. No hello. No, how are you? No, we need to talk about what happened. Just a demand. Short, transactional, familiar. I stared at the screen, feeling a strange mix of anger and clarity settle in my chest. This wasn't about reconciliation. This wasn't about family. This was about money. I thought about all the times I had hesitated before sending a payment. All the times I had wondered if I was being taken for granted, and then convinced myself I was overthinking. I typed slowly, carefully. Since Ethan is inheriting the house, I'm sure he can handle it. I hit send. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. Mom. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. Finally, another text appeared. Mom. Chloe, don't be like this. We need to talk. Now they wanted to talk. I waited an hour before replying. There's nothing to talk about. You made your decision. I thought that would be the end of it for the day. I was wrong. That evening, Ethan texted me. Ethan. Why are you being such a drama queen? I laughed out loud, the sound sharp and bitter. I typed back. Funny, you didn't think it was dramatic when I was paying the bills. He replied almost instantly. Ethan. It's not a big deal. Just help them out like you always do. Like I always do. Those 4 words told me everything I needed to know. Then you won't mind paying, right? I responded. It's your house now. This time the silence stretched longer. Several minutes passed before he answered. Ethan. You know I don't have that kind of money. Of course he didn't. He never had. And he never planned to, because I was always there to cover the gap. I put my phone down and took a deep breath, feeling something unfamiliar but steady settle in my chest. Relief. The next morning, Dad texted me. Dad, we're not asking for much. Just enough to cover the mortgage for a few months until we figure things out. Figure things out. I read the message twice, my jaw tightening. They had years to figure things out. Years while I quietly carried the weight for them. I replied with one sentence. No, I'm done. The response was immediate. Dad. Don't be selfish, Chloe. That word hit harder than anything else they'd said. Selfish. After years of sacrificing my own savings, my peace of mind, my time, I turned my phone off. For the rest of the day, I felt oddly calm, like I had stepped out of a role I didn't realize I was auditioning for my entire life. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. My parents had never handled losing control well, and this time, they weren't just losing money. They were losing the person who had been quietly holding everything together. Turning my phone off didn't stop them. It just changed their strategy. By the next morning, my voicemail was full. Not angry messages, those came later. These were softer, heavier, designed to make me feel small. When I finally turned my phone back on, Mom's message was the first one I listened to. Chloe, she said, her voice trembling. I don't understand why you're doing this. We're your parents. Family takes care of each other. Family. That word again. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in my hand, staring at the wall. For years, that single word had been enough to override my instincts, my exhaustion, my doubts. Not anymore. I didn't call her back. An hour later, another message came through, this time from Dad. You're really going to let us lose the house? He asked. After everything we've done for you? I felt my jaw tighten. Everything they'd done for me? I replayed the years in my head. The late nights, the transfers, the anxiety every time my savings dipped lower than I was comfortable with. The constant pressure to be the one who fixed things. I typed back slowly. I didn't decide this. You did. That seemed to flip a switch. The messages started coming faster. Mom, you're breaking my heart. Dad, we never raised you to be like this. Mom, Ethan isn't capable of handling this on his own. There it was. The truth they kept circling around without ever admitting it. They didn't need help. They needed me, specifically me, to keep doing what I'd always done. That afternoon, Ethan called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. What is wrong with you? he said the moment I picked up. No greeting, no hesitation. What's wrong with me? I repeated. You're blowing this way out of proportion, he snapped. It's just money. I let out a short laugh. It's only just money when it's not yours. He sighed, clearly annoyed. Look, Mom's stressed. Dad's stressed. You know how they are. Yes, I said quietly. I do. Then why are you punishing them? He asked. That word punishing made my chest tighten. I'm not punishing anyone, I replied. I'm stepping back. You can't just step back, he said. They need you. There it was again. Need. Not love. Not respect. Need. And what about you? I asked. They left you everything. When do you start acting like it? There was a pause. Then he said, You know I'm not ready for that. I closed my eyes. He wasn't ready. He was never ready. And no one expected him to be because I always filled the gap. I'm done filling it, I said. He scoffed. So you're just going to abandon them? That was the moment I felt the shift. The guilt wasn't working anymore. Funny, I replied calmly. They didn't think about abandonment when they wrote me out of their future. He hung up on me. That night, another text came in from Mom. Mom, if we lose the house, that will be on you. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking not from fear, but from disbelief. They had spent years benefiting from my support, years assuming my silence meant consent. And now that I had finally said no, they were trying to hand me the blame. I set my phone down and took a deep breath. For the first time, I saw the pattern clearly. The guilt trips, the pressure, the emotional leverage. This wasn't love. It was control. And once I saw it for what it was, I knew there was no going back. They weren't going to stop pushing, which meant the next step wasn't going to be quiet. It was going to be loud. I was at work when my phone rang. I almost ignored it. Almost. Hi, Chloe, the receptionist said carefully. Your parents are downstairs. My stomach dropped. What? I asked. They're insisting it's an emergency, she added. They said you're not answering their calls. Of course they did. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. Please don't let them up. I'm not expecting anyone. There was an awkward pause. They're being persistent. I don't care, I said firmly. They need to leave. I hung up, my hands shaking not with fear but with anger. 10 seconds later, my phone buzzed. Mom, we're downstairs. Open the door. No question. No apology. Just another demand. I didn't respond. Another text came through. Mom, we're not leaving until you talk to us. That was it. They weren't asking anymore. They were cornering me. I grabbed my keys and headed downstairs, my heart pounding. Not because I was scared, but because something inside me had finally had enough. When I opened the lobby door, there they were. Mom, Dad, and Ethan. Standing together like this was some kind of family intervention. Mom had her arms crossed, her face tight with disappointment. Dad stood stiffly beside her, hands in his pockets, already annoyed that this wasn't going the way he expected. And Ethan looked bored, like this was just another inconvenience he wanted to be done with. Finally, Mom said, We need to talk. I leaned against the doorframe, not moving aside. No, you need to leave. She blinked, genuinely confused. Excuse me? You heard me, I said calmly. You don't get to show up at my home unannounced and demand money. Dad scoffed. Are you seriously doing this in public? I let out a short, cold laugh. You didn't mind involving me when you needed my bank account. Mom's voice sharpened. Chloe, this is not the time for attitude. Then when was the time? I shot back. When you decided I didn't matter enough to be included in your future? Her face tightened. That's not fair, she said. We did what we thought was best for the family. I tilted my head. You mean what was best for Ethan? Silence fell between us. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in the floor. Dad stepped forward, his voice low. You're being selfish. I laughed. A real laugh this time. Selfish? I paid your mortgage. I covered your bills. I fixed your problems. And you planned a future where I got nothing. Mom gasped, pressing a hand to her chest like she always did when she wanted to look hurt. We thought you'd understand. That's the problem, I said quietly. You never asked. You just assumed. Ethan finally spoke. I didn't ask for this, okay? I didn't want to be dragged into your fight. I turned to him, my patience snapping. No, I said. You didn't ask. You just took. His face flushed. That's not fair. You're 28 years old, I said firmly. You want the house? Start acting like a homeowner. You want to be the favorite? Start paying their bills. Mom snapped. Chloe, he's your brother. And I've been supporting him longer than either of you, I replied. Dad's voice rose. We raised you. We fed you. We gave you everything. I met his gaze without flinching. And I paid you back with interest. For years. The lobby was silent now. A few people nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. Mom's voice dropped, sharp and controlled. If we lose the house, that will be on you. That was the moment everything clicked. I shook my head slowly. No, that will be on the people who decided I was only valuable when I was paying. Her mouth opened, then closed. No words came out. I straightened, feeling steadier than I ever had before. This conversation is over, I said. You made your choice. Now live with it. I turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind me before anyone could say another word. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Dad, after everything we've done for you, you're really going to abandon us? I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back one final sentence. You abandoned me first. I'm just finally accepting it. I hit send. And then I blocked their numbers. All of them. As I sat down on my couch, my heart was still racing, but beneath it was something new. Clarity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't bracing for the next demand. I had drawn a line. And no matter what came next, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't crossing it again. Blocking them didn't end the story. It just moved it somewhere louder. 3 days after they showed up at my building, my phone started buzzing again, this time from people I hadn't heard from in years. An aunt. A cousin. An old family friend. The messages all sounded eerily similar. Your mom is devastated. I hope you know what you're doing. Family doesn't turn their back like this. I stared at the screen, my chest tight. They hadn't told anyone the whole story. Of course they hadn't. Mom posted first. I didn't see it myself. I was sent a screenshot. A carefully worded paragraph. No names. No details. Just heartbreak. It's painful when a child you sacrificed everything for suddenly decides you're no longer worth helping. Some lessons come late in life. The comments were immediate. Heart emojis. Prayers. Strangers praising her strength. I felt sick. Dad followed with his own version, shorter, sharper. When money matters more than family, you learn who people really are. Ethan didn't post anything. He didn't have to. Their story was clear enough. I was the villain now. For years, my silence had protected them. Now, that same silence was being used against me. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I called a lawyer. A calm, middle-aged woman named Linda Parker, who listened without interrupting as I explained everything from the mortgage payments to the will to the messages. When I finished, she paused. Do you have records? She asked. Yes, I said immediately. Every transfer. Every bill. Good, she replied. Then you've been generous. Not obligated. That sentence landed harder than anything else had. Not obligated. She explained my options, how verbal expectations didn't equal legal responsibility, how their estate decisions mattered, how manipulation wasn't the same as law. You're allowed to step back, she said gently. And you're allowed to protect yourself. After I hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. Then I made a decision. I didn't write a rant. I didn't argue in comments. I didn't call anyone out by name. I wrote one post. Short, calm, clear. For years, I voluntarily helped my parents with their mortgage and expenses. Recently, I learned I was excluded from their estate plans. I chose to step back. This is a personal boundary, not abandonment. I wish them well. No insults. No accusations. Just facts. I turned off comments and logged out. The reaction wasn't instant, but it came. Private messages started trickling in. Quiet ones. I didn't know you were paying. That changes things. You didn't deserve that. Even one from an aunt who had messaged me earlier. I'm sorry. I should have asked before assuming. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. But for the first time, I also felt honest. That night, an unknown number texted me. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Mom. "You embarrassed us." I stared at the message, my hands steady. Then I typed back. "I told the truth." There was no reply. And somehow, that silence felt different. Heavier. Not the kind meant to control, but the kind that comes when people realize they've lost the narrative. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew this much. I wasn't hiding anymore. And whatever came after this wouldn't be built on guilt. It would be built on boundaries. Life didn't magically become easier after that, but it became clearer. The house didn't disappear overnight. My parents figured things out slowly, reluctantly, and with help they had avoided asking for before. Ethan stepped in more than he ever had. Not perfectly, not confidently, but enough to prove something important. They had never been helpless. They had just been comfortable letting me carry the weight. Weeks passed without messages. No guilt texts, no late-night accusations, just distance. At first, the silence hurt. Then it healed. I focused on my own life, my savings, my peace, my future. For the first time, my money wasn't a lifeline someone else felt entitled to. It was simply mine. I didn't stop loving my family. I stopped sacrificing myself to prove it. What surprised me most was how often people reached out privately afterward. Friends, coworkers, even strangers. They told me my story sounded familiar. They told me they were the responsible one too, the fixer, the backup plan. And that's when I realized this was never just about a will or a mortgage. It was about boundaries. Here's what I learned slowly, painfully, but clearly. Being generous does not mean being obligated. Silence is not consent. And love that only exists when you're useful is not love, it's dependence. Legally, I had rights. Emotionally, I had limits. And choosing myself didn't make me heartless, it made me honest. I don't know what the future holds for my family. Maybe time will soften things. Maybe it won't. But I do know this. I'm no longer living in fear of disappointing people who never planned to protect me. And that freedom? That was the inheritance I gave myself.